introductory slides about what we're going to be hearing today. I think we've got a great panel headed up by John Semple with Karen Cross, Jaz Chahal, and Amal Deshpande. And I think it's going to be really interesting. And so let me just share my slides. So Joanna, give me a thumbs up if I'm actually sharing them. Okay, excellent. Okay, good. So the title of our 4-session workshops is called "So You Want to Be an Entrepreneur," and there's actually some history to this relative to kind of our department. And if you look over the years, you know, we have changed in terms of our department, in terms of the individuals in the department and the interest in entrepreneurship. And I think that in the past there was the occasional entrepreneur, but really now we have quite a large number. And Joanna Giddens, who was one of the organizers of this session, actually did a survey of our faculty. And now there are approximately 70 of our faculty who say that they're doing some sort of entrepreneurship in their work. And certainly there's a fair bit of interest among our trainees. I think the other thing that's changed is that the ecosystem has changed. Whereas in the past, if you were somebody who was doing innovation and entrepreneurship, you were very much the lone wolf. And I think now this is really deeply embedded across the University of Toronto. There are incubators, there's lots of networking, there's a fair bit of mentorship that's available to help with that. So I think it's something that you'll find very commonly throughout our department across the university. In the past, in our department, I think we had a fairly modest role in the promotion of entrepreneurship, and that has changed considerably over the last decade. Certainly, the profile has increased. We now have a job description called the Surgeon Entrepreneur, which is part of the Surgeon Investigator stream. We have workshops such as this one with Moji Hodai. We're trying to integrate this into the residency training program to give our trainees some exposure to entrepreneurship. And obviously, there's a fair bit of increased visibility across the university. And I think finally, and perhaps most importantly, is that I think people always wondered where the output of innovation and entrepreneurship fell in the academic career path. You know, it's a little bit hard to count the number of things that you've done compared to counting publications and grants, but I think it's pretty clear now that, you know, innovation, entrepreneurship is considered to be very much eligible for the promotion stream, and it's really the impact of the work that you do that's most important. So we have these 4 workshops that we are carrying out. We had the first one back in the fall, at the end of last year, headed by Paul Walker. This one is chaired by John Semple. It's going to be mostly on digital applications, but we have one coming up in June that Shaf Khashoggi is going to do around the area of medical devices. And then finally in the fall, we'll have the 4th of our workshops on AI and how AI might be utilized within surgery to develop innovation and some commercialization. So I think that we don't know who's heading that yet, and we don't know the panel yet, but that's what is headed for the 4th of these 4. And what you're going to hear is a moderated panel discussion, moderated obviously by John. The objective is really to identify and attract and engage residents and faculty with entrepreneurial interest to kind of look in more deeply. We want to obviously showcase our faculty in the Department of Surgery as leaders in surgical innovation and entrepreneurship to both our own stakeholders, but possibly to a wider audience. And then finally, to highlight the Toronto advantage. And I think we'll find from each of the speakers, you're going to hear of how the ecosystem across the University of Toronto is really outstanding for developing your work in the area of entrepreneurship. So here's the summary from Paul Walker's that was done back last year. Actually, you can read them yourself. You know, multidisciplinary teams were important, mentorship's important, local opportunities were available in the U of T ecosystem. I think actually the most interesting of them is the very first one, the surgical phenotype is actually quite appropriate for being an entrepreneur. That's because surgeons apparently are decisive. Surgeons are very goal oriented. And one of the funny things that came out of it was that surgeons are sometimes comfortable with failure. And in order to be a successful entrepreneur, you certainly have to be comfortable with failure. So I think that that's really one of the kind of interesting and somewhat humorous takeaways from that last one. This one is going to be headed off by John. John, as many of you will know, is the former chief of surgery at Women's College Hospital. He's a plastic and reconstructive surgery surgeon. Some of you will know that he's a high altitude climber and an expert on high altitude physiology, but he also has his own company that has to do with basically digital applications. So without further ado, I'll turn the podium over to John. And John, looking forward to a really great event with you, Karen, Jazz, and Amal. So thank you very much for helping us.
Great. Thanks so much, Ori. First of all, I want to congratulate Ori and his committee and Dr. Jim Rutka on this initiative to embed entrepreneurship into the surgical training program at U of T, and also recognizing that entrepreneurship is a career path for surgeons in training. So this is workshop number 2, as Ori mentioned, and this session is essentially on digital applications, which is a very ripe area for innovation these days. And certainly digital literacy in medicine has exploded over the past couple of years in regards to the pandemic. People say that pre-pandemic utilization of virtual care in medicine was somewhere around 11%, and currently now at approximately 60%. And certainly some, certainly family practice, for instance, almost totally converted to a type of virtual care in that regard. I think we have an exciting panel on the program today. We have 3 expert panelists, and we'll hear from the panelists first. We have Karen Cross, Jazz Jahal, and Amal Deshpande from Mars. And we will, after they've finished speaking, then we'll open up a panel discussion. I'll be fielding some questions, but we also want to open up some of the questions for the audience to have a chance to engage the panelists as well. So I think we'll start with Karen. So Karen, if you can introduce yourself and tell us your story in terms of where you've started off and where you are at the moment.
I'm Karen Cross. I'm a plastic and reconstructive surgeon. Also graduated from the surgeon scientist program, and really it was through the surgeon scientist program that gave me the idea for Mimosa. Then set out to, not intentionally, so if someone was to ask me when I entered medicine, would I be an entrepreneur? I probably would have said no. I wanted to be a scientist, and that's why I became a doctor. But it came naturally, and I realized that when I was in the lab and we were making big pieces of technology, that it wasn't actually going to benefit the patients. And when I became staff, I realized that this technology had to be portable, it had to be digital, it had to be remote, and it had to be remote monitoring. And that was the only way that we were truly going to solve these problems. And that's when I became an entrepreneur. And sometimes, you know, commercializing your idea is the way forward to change the system. What did we create? We've created mobile health technology. We've paired a class 2 medical device that looks below the surface of the skin at novel biomarkers that are predictive of outcome, and paired that with a mobile health platform and trying to solve the problem of peripheral vascular disease, specifically critical limb ischemia and wound physiology. So we've set up to do that. We are a small company. So I actually have a company. I'm the CEO and co-founder of that company. I've set out to bring this company and product to market. We're an FDA cleared device and currently commercialized in the United States. So that's, I guess, a brief summary of me, why I'm here, and the company we created.
I think, thanks, Karen. That was excellent. I think what we'll do is go straight to Jazz, and then we can start. Then after Amal's talk, we can start to ask some questions. So Jazz, why don't you go ahead now?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for the invitation, Dr. Rothstein, Dr. Semple. I really appreciate it. And looking forward to sharing some of my experience with you guys. I do have some slides, so I will take control of the screen here. Can you guys see my background? Fantastic. Okay, so thank you again for the invitation to speak. You know, I started Therapia in 2016, and I'll definitely go through the journey in terms of what it was like, some of the ups, some of the downs, and where we are now, and hopefully we can build on some of those things during our discussion. Just to summarize it, in case you don't know, Therapia is a healthcare technology marketplace. So that essentially means there's a supply side, which are healthcare providers, and a demand side where there are patients looking for certain healthcare services. So it's really a healthcare marketplace that's online, and it connects patients to providers in their home. So it's really a way of transitioning care from institutions into patients' homes, into spaces where they're really comfortable, you know, with a mission to empower patients to heal comfortably in the environments they choose to do so. And the idea really started for me in 2000, and I'd say at the end of 2014. You know, just similar to Karen, I was part of the surgeon scientist training program. I did a master's in Clinepi, and if you had asked me, I never would have said I wanted to pursue entrepreneurship. I did go back and do my MBA early on in my career in 2014, and that really opened up a different way of thinking for me. Somebody really who had no business background. I don't think you need an MBA by any means to do any entrepreneurial endeavors, but at least for me, with zero background and given my learning style, it definitely provided a great springboard in terms of mentors, in terms of understanding some major trends and forces in the world today. So at that time, like, you know, I was sitting in my office, I was on call, it was Christmas, and, you know, just like any good junior staff does. And I was actually taking care of my patient who had surgery before the holidays, and they had a really hard time accessing care. Clinics are closed. They need to do physiotherapy, and I felt the system, at least in the areas where they live, was failing them. So this was a time of Uber. This was a time of the on-demand labor economy, services like DoorDash and so forth that we're familiar with today that we take for granted. They were just starting back then. And I thought about, can we do an Uber for healthcare? And really it started with, can I send physiotherapists to my patient's home after surgery when they're vulnerable, they're in pain, they're not mobile? Can we make things better for them? I kind of left it alone. And during my MBA, we had like a VC session where we pitched various ideas, and it turned out this idea won. And one way or another, it looks like this was en route. We started the journey. So we ultimately created a marketplace, as I said, that connects providers to patients in their home. Consider it like an Uber for physiotherapy in the first iteration. You know, for patients, we address certain pain points like eliminate the average travel time of 40 minutes per visit, really provide convenience in their own environment at a time where they're vulnerable, they've had surgery, maybe they're old and they're frail and travel is really not the best option, and take care of other pain points like how do you find a physiotherapist, take care of all the payments, the billing, the receipts, the insurance, really make it a nice, easy, seamless process. And for physiotherapists and other healthcare providers like them in the allied healthcare space, we learned that one major pain point is that most of these people don't own clinics. They don't run their own practice. They really keep 50% of their billings. And so we offered an ability to make more money, work on their schedule, be entrepreneurs. So we provided them with a toolkit in which they can do that. And so we really created a two-sided solutions, make patients' lives easier, make them more convenient. And for therapists, help them make more money and give them the tools they need to be entrepreneurs, travel, and have a mobile practice. Maybe it's a side hustle, maybe it's a full-time thing. We had we do have a proprietary matching algorithm that connects patient factors with therapist factors and creates an ideal match and sends therapists or providers to patients' homes. And just really quickly, without getting too far into it, how have we done? We've been around for approximately 4 years. We provided 45,000 physical therapy sessions in patients' homes across Canada, in 5 major cities, in multiple cities, but in 5 major metropolitan areas. Probably the strongest point is once we acquire a patient, we do a reasonable job of retaining them. If a patient does physical therapy on our platform, they do an average of 12 visits, and that's really good compliance and really good stickiness or retention compared to a clinic where patients may drop off after 6, 7, or 8 sessions based on the data that's out there. So patients stick around, they create a lot of value, therapists create a lot of value over time, therapists earn money, and patients have shown really high satisfaction ratings. So with that, I don't want to go too much into the business dynamics or details, but I really want to talk about, what have I learned along the way? And there's so much that I've learned, and there's so many mistakes that we've made that I could probably just do a whole talk on the mistakes that we've made, but I'll start off at a high level. So the major challenges and considerations that you or one would have in any startup is the team. I'd say most importantly. For example, in our case, how many founders do you have? We probably had too many. We started off with 5 founders, and right off the bat, issues come into play like how do you make decisions? Decisional inertia is a real thing when people don't agree. How do you split up equity? How do you manage strong personalities who tend to be co-founders? And ultimately, how do you deal with a team that's predominantly part-time? We were a part-time team. And, if you're a surgeon or you're going to be a resident and you want to have a startup or get into entrepreneurship, being a part-time entrepreneur is one of the hardest things to do. And I really think it requires an all-in approach. And there's probably some tactics around that we can discuss that would help alleviate that challenge. Deep expertise on your team is great to have, but what you really need is vision, leadership, and definitely I say domain expertise helps, but you can also hire domain expertise. When you build a product, I'd say, we initially built a pretty comprehensive product that we launched onto the market with a lot of features. But I think the best thing to do is build a bare bones product with really features that test your core hypothesis. And then you test that hypothesis on the market and you let the market tell you what's good and bad, and then you iterate. I think that's probably my preferred way of doing it. There's issues like where do you develop it? If it's a software company or an app, do you build it in-house with your company? Do you outsource it to a development shop? Do you do onshore versus offshore development, for example, Canada versus the Philippines or Brazil, where it may be cheaper? Raising money. At some point, you need to raise money. So initially, you can bootstrap it. You can put your own money into it and develop the product. At some point, you need capital. So when you raise capital, do you acquire capital from friends and family? Do you get it from an angel investor? Do you get, networked capital that can give you introductions and maybe a strategic edge from venture capital? It depends on your goals and your ambitions, but raising capital and being able to present and articulate your vision is definitely something that's part of the journey that you will learn and have to learn. And ultimately, you build a product, you have a great team, now you have money. Too much money is not good and too little money is not good. But let's say you have the right amount of money, now you need to grow. And this is where you actually have to learn a whole different, toolkit of skills, salesmanship, thinking outside the box, product development, and all sorts of things you never actually have to think about. So you can build it, but they don't always come. So I think growth is really the ultimate exercise in knowledge translation. We all do research and we talk about knowledge translation. But if you can build a product around a great team and you can grow it, you've actually made a lot of impact in your community. If I was going to do it again, and I will do it again, I think you have to solve problems you're passionate about. Try to create mission-driven companies because you can inspire yourself, you can inspire your team, and you can actually hire really great people if they believe in your mission. Build a great product or service that addresses an unmet problem, an inefficiency, a need for your population, and try to leverage your unfair advantage. Like everyone has some sort of unfair advantage. Know what it is and incorporate it into your product, service, or device, or whatever you're working on. Find the right team, go all in. I would say go full time, and there's challenges around that, but I think it's really important. And move quickly, quicker than you think. Raise money, and you have to be able to execute. I think coming up with an idea is fun. It's not always easy, but it's fun, and it's part of one of the really inspiring parts of the process, but executing is really what it's all about. There's a ton of great ideas out there. I think very few people can execute them. I really think any team in the right place at the right time can execute most reasonable ideas. So I think execution is obviously really important. And I'd love to talk more about my journey. So happy to answer any questions at any point.
That's great. That's great, Jazz. Thank you. Very interesting story and excellent points you brought out there. That was great. One of the issues that I felt might be important for as the workshops carry through, and I think Ori said there was going to be 4 of them. I thought that it would be interesting for the entrepreneurs or in training to actually develop a toolbox as we progress through this. And for that reason, I felt it would be important to ask to be one of the panelists, a representative from Mars, just to find out what resources are available to individuals at what point. And so when I discovered Mal Deshpande from Mars, who's the Senior Director of Health Sciences, has an MD and an MBA, so he's well versed to be an expert, crossover expert from our point of view. And I asked Amal to sort of talk a little bit about what Mars might be able to offer and at what point it becomes an attraction to them. And also what are the characteristics of a project that suddenly becomes attractive? So Amal, why don't you go ahead and tell us what you can about those issues.
Super. Can you see the screen, John? I don't know if you can.
Not at the
I'm guessing that's a no.
No.
Of course you can't. Of course you can't. This would happen. I apologize. How's that? No? If not, I can just talk about it. Can you see that?
Oh yeah, no.
Nope.
Yeah.
Send it again.
No.
Send it again.
Perhaps you could just sort of.
Yeah, I'll go through it. I'll just talk about it. I'll do a Karen because I think that's more powerful anyway. So first of all, thank you. Like kudos to the Department of Surgery for doing this. I think it's a brilliant idea. I hope the other departments follow you guys. I think it's long overdue, and thank you, John, for reaching out. Just as some conflicts of interest, I know you can't see it, but just I'm a recovering academic clinician, having just given up my academic practice at UHN in December, so I still have a bit of this academia in me. So conflicts of interest. Besides Mars, just to be clear, I also am co-chair of Halo Health, which is an angel investing, physician-led angel investing group across Canada. I'm also a venture partner at AIoT Health, so some of the companies here might be in there, and also run a podcast on digital health. So when I'm not busy, that's what I'm doing. John asked me to talk a little bit about Mars. I've got some slides here. For all those who don't know about it, it's that glassy building at the corner of college and university. And I wanted to sort of demystify a little bit about what it does, because I think there's some confusion. So just to be clear, Mars has sort of two businesses, if you want to think about it that way. It has a tenant landlord business where we have a number of companies in there, all the way from small ventures like the ones we're talking about today, to larger ventures, to VCs, to research organizations like OICR, like OGI, UHN, and that plus the events is real. So Mars Impact, for example, is a digital health showcase that we put on coming up at the end of May. So I encourage all of you, if you're interested, to attend that. It will be a hybrid event where you'll see companies like the ones you're seeing today, as well as others that are further down the path and earlier, and you'll get to network. So that's part of what we do. And then the other piece that I think is relevant that I want to talk a little bit more is about helping ventures. And so what Mars does is we help ventures across various stages of their life cycle. Mars has about sort of 1,400 ventures in its portfolio across a number of domains. The ones we work on are health tech, which is what we're talking about today, including digital health, med devices, and biotech. We also work in clean tech, enterprise, fintech, and SaaS. And what we do is we onboard companies and try and help them to get sort of a faster liftoff, if you will. It'll come in various stages depending on where you are. If you're really early stage, we will have sort of curated content for you to understand more about business if it's not familiar to you. So things a lot about what Jazz touched on in terms of fundraising, building a pitch, in terms of valuation, in terms of building out a roadmap, in terms of sort of understanding your product, your value proposition, things that some of you are very familiar with, others sort of those may be new terminologies. So for the early stage, you'll get sort of socialized with some of those, that vernacular. The next level is if you're sort of incorporated, you're further along the path, you may be sent to sort of our engagement team where we have senior advisors with specific domain experience. We have a senior advisor who has deep knowledge in biotech. We have one who has deeper knowledge in med devices and one for digital health. And you'll be on board and you'll be sort of shepherded, if you will, with those senior advisors so they can actually help you prepare for your fundraising. So this is probably when you're closer to a seed or a Series A stage funding, and you probably need to sort of tighten the story up, if you will. You'll be onboarded with those individuals. And finally, for any of you who are lucky to get to that stage, we have a program called Momentum, which really looks at really educating the C-suite of higher sort of punching ventures. These are ventures that typically already have about $5 million in ARR, which is annual recurring revenue, and are on their way to $100 million of ARR. So if you find your path, you're on that road, then again, that's a different team that engages you. And where I work is on the ecosystem side of Mars. So that's really the interface between the ventures and the outside world. So again, getting back to what Jazz was saying, it's about introducing ventures when they're ready to some of the venture capitalists that are out there if you're looking for funding. It's introducing you to customers, whether it's pharma, whether it's companies like Medtronic or Boston Scientific, if they're looking for other innovations that might be in the ecosystem that they don't have in-house, and they're looking for strategic acquisitions. So that's usually where I will play a role and try and bridge that gap. And we have a number of what we call VC syndicates inside Mars, where we have regular meetings with venture capitalists, familiar names if you're in the ecosystem that we have regular meetings with, and we sort of send them deals that they might be interested in terms of investing. And then, finally, I'll end fairly quickly. You can apply to Mars online. I can send that link to Joanna and John. You can sort of send it around. It's basically Mars DD at startups. Apply now. And I'm not going to go through all the criteria, but some of the things that you should just be aware of for Mars, and this is even just to get at the early stage, is you need to be incorporated in Canada, number one. Two, you need to have an actual product. So this has to be beyond a PowerPoint slide. That's really important. Two, and this is open to interpretation, but you need to have sort of dedicated or committed founders, and Jazz was sort of touching on that a little bit. And third, again, we can talk about that. It's a bit controversial, but you need to address a significant market, and we can debate what significant means. And that's where we come in. So I think Ori mentioned there's a lot of accelerators and incubators in U of T, on campus, off campus. Ryerson has some too. And so I would say sort of depending on where you are, what stage you're in, it can often be a little bit confusing, but if you need any help sort of deciding whether Mars is sort of right for you, I'm happy to talk to you about it, and feel free to reach out, and I'll leave my email as well. With that, I'll give it back to you, John.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Amal. Amal, before we sort of leave your sort of area, I'd be interested to know, and you described the mechanics of the what's offered, but what do you see as like the secret sauce in a particular project? Like what is it that actually attracts you to something that you feel is a high potential of being a high success? And what, like in your investors, where does that come down? Like, can you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, I can describe it, and you get 4 other people in the room, you probably have 8 opinions. So I think it's really in the eye of the beholder. What I would say is it touches really, and again, I think Jazz kind of said it, we could have talks on each one of these things, but I think his last slide kind of really is what you're looking for. The big thing for me, and I'll tell you what we look for at Mars, we look for a strong team. So a team that has both domain expertise to not only just around the science of what you're doing, but also how to build that out, how to take it to the next step, right? So it gets from bench literally to bedside in a big way. 2, what does the market look like? Like this may be something you need, but let's take you, if you're a plastic surgeon, how many other plastic surgeons need it? How many of your patients actually need it, or is this just a one-off item, which may be very valuable? So it just doesn't make it a venture business, right? And those are probably the 2 things I would say really top kind of line items. And then I think the other thing, which I think is this is where scientists, I would argue, and I'm happy to have sort of Karen and Jazz sort of push back on this, is on the investor side, I think being able to tell a really compelling story around what you're doing, a really compelling narrative, I think is really important when you start sort of to pitch to other people who may not get what you're doing, right? So this is not your colleagues. This is not people at a peer review publication or a meeting. This is really trying to communicate what you're doing, and there's some deep science in it to people who may just not have that depth of experience. So I think that's really important as well. So those are kind of the 3 things that I would say at least get you in the door, and then we can sort of go further down, and there are other things we look for, but those are pretty critical.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I think that's a great description. This is a question I have for Karen and Jazz. You are both full-time surgeons and have been for some time. Like, how did you balance that concept of actually having a fairly successful sort of entrepreneurial project or a parallel system that was running? And I know that last workshop, Paul Walker talked a little bit about the definition of an entrepreneur. And the one that resonated with me recently that I saw was that an entrepreneur is somebody that works 24/7 to avoid working from 9 to 5. But I think that combining surgeons' responsibilities, which is huge, and then you've got an open-ended job description as a founder of a company. How do you balance that, and when does that become too much that you start to reach out for help? Karen, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's another full-time job, right? That CEO of a company is a full-time job. It's a full-time job description. And so is a surgeon, and you can't be a part-time surgeon either. So I think you have to look at your life and balance it all. And I think it is a 24/7. The way I've always seen my job or my work is I love it. So I'm passionate about it. So is it work? So for me, it was, okay, if I'm sitting back to the computer at 9 o'clock to have meetings or, review a paper, read the regulatory document that needs to get out the next day, then that's what you're doing. And you sort of push through and get it done because it's your passion and it's I mean, I've spent 15 years building this thing. It is my life's work in some ways. So I think it is challenging, but at some point, back to investors and investment, there's a point when you have to make a decision because you can't be part-time in both spaces. And that time it comes if you want to, or you hand it off to someone else to run the business end of things, but you do have to make decisions at certain points of the stages of the company.
Okay, Jazz?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Karen and Amol said. I think it's an ongoing tug and war between your full-time role as a surgeon and your full-time role as a CEO or as a co-founder in your company. I think it's incredibly challenging to do both. I actually wouldn't recommend you do both, but it can be done. Can it be done successfully? I think probably you're running uphill during the whole process. It's hard enough to be a surgeon, It's hard enough to be as an entrepreneur in a startup. To do both is incredibly challenging, and I think you risk not doing either one well, if I'm going to be totally frank. So I think what you end up doing is you end up, like you're passionate about both, you work really hard, and you don't care about the hours, you prioritize things in your life that are more important than others. But ultimately, I think at some point, you have to make the decision, are you going to go full-time or not? And the sooner you make that decision, the easier it is for you and your company. And if you choose not to, I think you have to be willing to hand off the reins of leadership to somebody else. But, I think a CEO of a company that is not a founder is a little bit different than a CEO of a company that is a founder. And I don't know if Amol or Karen, John, you yourself would agree with that or not. John, what was your approach? I mean, you did it. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I realized pretty quickly that I didn't have the skills to actually for the business end of it. And so my co-founder was in fact had the business end of it, as well as the digital developing sense of it as well. So, and I think that was my, we started off that way, but as we developed, we kept bringing in more people at different levels. And I think I think Amal sort of alluded to this aspect of having a team. And I think because it's almost impossible to balance a surgical responsibility, being the main person in a company that's rapidly, it's a high velocity company, it's moving quickly, you have to be aware of everything that's going on all the time. So I actually sort of had a partner, and I was able to continue being a surgeon and not worry about the business aspects of it, even though I was a co-founder. But the kind of things that we were doing of transitioning or mobile technology for a patient experience in transitioning from institution to home was what I was doing all the time anyway. So I was sort of had my both feet in it, but the business aspects of it and the design aspects of it, I was able to contribute without giving up a lot of the surgical sort of practice. So how did you go, both Karen and Jazz, at what point did you start to choose team members, and how important was that to you to get the right person? Karen?
Yeah, I think your team's everything, and it's back to Amal's point. Like you're being judged on your team, and can you can you develop a product, and can you scale a product? Can you grow it? Does your team know what they're doing? And it is certainly how you tell the story to the investors, but can you tell it in a way that also makes business sense with all their metrics when they're being evaluated? I think team for me is everything. In fact, that's why I love also Mimosa Diagnostics, because every single person that we've hired in our company, I enjoy working with. I also think that they're the top of their game. I've learned a lot about leading a team, and I think as a surgeon, you're constantly leading a team in the operating room, and you're responsible for the decision making. This is different. It's the same, but it is different. Definitely with some of the same challenges that you'd face in personal interactions, but also it's a little bit different. And I think you and I, John, talked a little bit about, I don't know if you want me to explore that now, but
yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. Just getting back a little bit around the vision of Mimosa, and when the idea for Mimosa came about is about addressing inequality in the healthcare system, both in geography, so where people live, no one should lose their leg because they live in a rural community. The second is that nobody should have technology that's only for white people. Like, we have to make technology that's good for all people. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. And so when we set out our journey, we set out on that journey of creating equity, and we did it, right? So we have created the first technology, optical imaging technology, that can account for melanin and can account for skin pigmentation. But not only that, as a leader, when you realize that this is the vision and mission of what you want to achieve, that passion, you know, you're giving up a portion of your career in surgery to go out and do this. You also realize that if that's the mentality of how you put yourself forward into the world, it's also how you have to be internally. And so for me as a leader, I learned a lot about equity, diversity, and inclusion. I learned a lot about my leadership skills and in some cases, my lack of leadership skills and what I had to do to grow. And then finally, I feel like I became inspired and I looked at other people, not just in the business community, in the medical community outside, to say, how can I become like that? And how can I learn from those people? And so for me, the business part or leading the company has truly been about leadership, but I've grown a tremendous amount in the last 4 years, I think hopefully for the better. And I think it's been the greatest lesson for me in leadership and bringing out the best in people and the best in your team.
So you mentioned just a while ago too that your hiring practices is based on your commitment to diversity as well, like in terms of your actual team and your company as well.
Yeah, so our philosophies, both in our interview process, we realized when we were interviewing people, they were automatically eliminating immigrants and we were automatically eliminating people of color. And it was just the nature of our questions. And so the first thing we did is we had someone look at our interview questions or how we were selecting people, a person with EDI experience from the business community to say, okay, how can we be more inclusive just even in our interview practices? So it's the first thing we did. The second is it's very important to me to address the pay gaps that exist with women. And I mean, Nancy Baxter brought this to light. We know this exists in surgery. And it was very important to myself and my co-founder to address the gender pay gap. So we are, I think, the Patagonia of MedTech, where we introduced an open compensation policy. So everybody knows what everyone's making. We know how much equity they have in the company. Everything is open. And by that, we find that and again, not to be disparaging, but white men will always negotiate their salaries. They will always ask for more, but a woman will not, and neither will a person of color. And so what we said is this is not a negotiation. Here is the formula. This is what you're going to make. Here's our vision, mission. And in fact, we've been able to really bring in top talent because they also want to see the world be this way. So I think the team that we've brought on board also shares our vision and mission. And we've been able to even get senior talent who just want to change the world, especially as it exists inside a company. So I think we're not perfect, but we're working on it. So
that's excellent. Amal, I was going to ask you, what do investors and people that are funding projects like this, do they look for addressing diversity and equity in companies as well as B Corp? I mean, our company was B Corp certified. And I don't know whether people know what that is, but it's a bit like, it's actually a hard certification to get for a company, but it's a bit like the Fair Trade Coffee Company, where if it's fair trade coffee, then there's certain transparency, certain sort of ways that the company is run to adhere to certain principles that are considered the best possible business practices. So do those things matter to investors at all, Amal?
So it's a good question, and you know the quick answer to that is yes. I think, but I'd be lying if I say it matters to all investors. And this is sort of where, if you're, you know, and I guess the one thing I do want to say, John, is because I see this when I'm reviewing companies, is all companies don't need to be, nor should they be, venture companies. That doesn't make it a bad business. So I just want to say that, because I think entrepreneurs always think you've got to go the venture route, and that's not true. And particularly in healthcare, you can have a huge impact without being a venture business. So just because you get, you know, a no from a venture capitalist doesn't mean you're doing the wrong thing. It just means it doesn't fit their perspective. And what I wanted to go sort of further down to answer your question is, I think it really depends on the VC that you're pitching to. The group now is so heterogeneous. You know, you have VCs that only focus, to Karen's point, on women-led founders. They will not invest in any companies other than women-led founders. You have others that require the C-suite to have a certain diversity, like 50-30, 50% females, 30% sort of a diverse ethnicity. So it really, yes to your question, but it really depends on the entrepreneur to know who they're pitching to you and to make sure that their sort of vision and mission is aligned with what yours is as well. Right. So that's important. If you go into some companies and they don't care about it, and that's how you're actually staking your company, it's going to be a mismatch. And it doesn't mean nobody cares about it. It just means that person in front of you, that's not high on their priority. So I think doing a lot of sort of due diligence on the other side when you go to these investors is really important as well. And finding that alignment, because I think if you get that alignment at the beginning, that'll really hold strongly for you as you move the company. So you don't, if you continue to hire like that, then that makes a lot of sense to the investor, right? And because both of you are both aligned in terms of what you're looking for in terms of diversity. So yes, but you need to look for those individuals. But absolutely, it matters to some people, 100%.
Okay, thank you. Jazz, Jubini, how did you choose your partners or your team from that point of view?
Yeah, so our initial market category was physiotherapy, and me being in orthopedics, I had the MSK part covered. I had reached out to physical therapists as well that I trusted and had worked with quite a bit. So I thought I would want somebody who was a physical therapist or in allied healthcare. And then, but I think the most important recruit was our CTO. Before I approached anybody, I approached Amble Squawk, who's our CTO, who's also now actually the CTO for Thumbtack Canada, or the head of technology for Thumbtack Canada, which is a Series D funded firm. And, it's really important because ultimately we have a technology product and you need deep expertise in the technology you're building. So whether it's, biotechnology, whether it's like you're creating a device or a smartphone app, you got to be really good in that domain. So I think that was probably the most important co-founder. And then arguably, like, no disrespect to my other co-founders, like we just needed he could have done it alone, arguably, outsourced doctors and physicians. And and I wanted to be on the other end of that. I wanted to be a healthcare provider that kind of forays into healthcare technology as opposed to the other way around. So CTO was super important, and then we had two other healthcare providers that we knew really well. But I think a team was too big. I think there's a sweet spot. I think 4 is too many. You probably need 1, 2, probably not more than that, but maybe in some rare cases.
Okay. I'm just going to switch gears a little bit here. Actually, I don't know if there's some questions from the audience. We've got about 10 minutes left. Joanna, do we have questions? If not, I'd like to.
No, I haven't received any, but if anyone wants to raise their hand, you're welcome. Oh, Monica Farkas has a question.
Okay.
Thank you for the wonderful talks. I think, one of the common themes is certainly that you need a really strong team, and that's ideal. I'm certainly an innovator that I'm looking more towards not being the CEO of my company, but I'm looking at building a strong team. Where do you start with that? Where do you find, people to interview? How do you go about that? Any advice for me?
Karen, do you want
to go ahead, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, we've found some people through Mars. We've found some people through Bio. It's really about connecting in with your innovation group and saying, hey, this is my plan. It's always good to also find someone who knows someone, so you have a little bit of background, and clearly meeting them and making sure you gel, because in the end, you're going to be spending a lot of time together. But there's so many there's so many places, and Mars is a great one. Actually, we found some really good people at Mars.
Jazz?
Yeah, I think, Monica, were you asking about co-founders or employees?
I guess one would be like a CEO. We'd be looking for a CEO. I guess employees down the road too, but that's the main person, right?
Yeah, I think, if you're looking for a CEO who's external, there's a lot of ways to go. You can go through your networks. So if people have invested in your company, maybe start with them. If they have networks, certainly you can try open forums like AngelList or Startup North or Indeed. But I think the high value positions like a CEO or like a C-suite kind of person really comes from networks that you or somebody you know can recommend.
It's a very critical step. I think that choosing a CEO, some of the other technical aspects, there are many accountants and sort of services you can actually outsource fairly well. But I think if you're choosing a CEO, I think that it's a very critical part of going forward. And as been mentioned before, it's somebody you're going to spend a lot of time with. So there has to be a compatibility factor in there.
Actually, one of our residents created an app, like a machine learning artificial intelligence app for, essentially he has a patent on looking at using a smartphone to detect human movement and then identifying patterns, which has implications for physiotherapy, diagnosis, treatment, et cetera. And I think he just basically, he went to a job board, it might have been Startup North or something like it, got a bunch of great candidates, offered attractive compensation and equity, and it happened to work out. But that's probably not the routine way to go.
And reach out to the business schools. So if you called Rotman and said, I'm looking for someone with business experience, they have a whole ecosystem as well that will pair you. And in the beginning, before we even started the company, we had an MBA at Rotman who helped us with our business plan and got us off the ground.
Anybody else, Joanna?
Dr. Rutka, and then Shaishav Dada.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Joanna. I guess question open to everybody, but maybe comments about starting a company during a pandemic. And Jazz, you in particular, with what you did, getting physiotherapists to come into somebody's home. How threatened was that at a time, when that wasn't permissible? And then maybe you could talk about how you monitor patient satisfaction or maybe client satisfaction with the products you're created. You may not know these individuals so well, and how do you ensure that they're doing exactly what you wanted to in your system? And then finally, some comments about how do you take care of the medical, legal, or indemnification issues, right? If something goes wrong with the technology you've created, what's behind you to kind of keep you safe and afloat and avoid any major legal issues?
Yeah, thanks. The first part about COVID, definitely a challenge. We launched this company before COVID, and we were actually hitting really key growth milestones. And when COVID hit, our business and sales dropped by 80%. And we pivoted to a hybrid in-home virtual model, which a lot of healthcare delivery companies did at that time. So it was nothing novel, but it was necessary. And then we just created procedures and policies that would still make in-home care safe at a time when hospitals and clinics were closed. And some patients just couldn't. For some patients felt it was more risky to leave home, for example, seniors, and go to a clinic than it was for an individual who was asymptomatic and not exposed to come into their home. So we ultimately recovered, but we did take an 80% hit in sales, and it took months and probably it took over a year to get back to pre-COVID levels. So definitely a challenge, and I think it was felt by a lot of startups that are similar to ours. In terms of patient satisfaction, that's a great question. We used to initially get patients to rate physiotherapists, and patients would rate physiotherapists. Each therapist would have a 5-star rating, or out of 5 stars, we would know how good they were in delivering care. We've also used other tools like a Net Promoter Score, where you simply it's like an SF1. You simply fire an email to patients after their experience, and you ask them, how satisfied are you from a scale to 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, depending on your denominator, and you can kind of keep track of that. And that's all seamless and digital, but we do have a customer service person now that follows up after every first initial visit, just to make sure everything was smooth, troubleshoot, helps us improve our processes, and vet everything and as we go on. Finally, in regards to medical legal liability, we do have various kinds of insurance, vicarious liability insurance. We have in-depth procedures and policies and terms of service that we do update periodically. So, I mean, nothing is 100% proof, but we do mitigate those with legal advice and also insurance.
Great, thanks.
So because we're a class 2 medical device, heavily regulated, we just received our regulatory clearance as the pandemic was hitting. Clearly everything with supply chain, voltage regulators, anything for a circuit board, you couldn't really get that anywhere. And what happened to us is the people who make our camera module decided not to make it anymore. They went to ventilators. And so because everyone was making PPE and ventilators, you couldn't find this camera module anywhere in the world. That meant a full submission back to the regulatory body. So we went through a full regulatory submission during COVID, still managed to get it cleared and back on the market. So COVID for us was almost devastating. And I would say transparently, we were wondering if we were actually going to survive that storm. Thankfully we did. We iterated quickly. We actually turned and opened up the web portal. So we were able to do the mobile health part, which we had not planned to do at that point. And not only that, put something like a Zoom API in it so you could have video calls within the device. So it's a sort of the communication piece. Back to liability, we have a ton of liability insurance, both not just for the product itself, but also you need directors and officers, the liability insurance for your investments. So there's a lot of insurance, a lot of money that goes out the door in order to protect you, like as the CEO and the founders, and your officers, as well as your product.
Okay. We're getting fairly close to 6 o'clock. We are at 6 o'clock. Can we do one more question?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. There's. Alicia?
Yeah, Shaishav has had his hand up. Go ahead.
You're on mute.
Thank you so much. This is a question for both Dr. Cross and Dr. Chahal. I'm a medical student and I'm looking forward into the surgeon scientist program, as well as just types of teaching that will be offered in residency programs for entrepreneurs. You guys created your company in a time when these type of opportunities didn't exist. So if you could go back in time and have this type of program exist for you, what would you hope to see there? What kind of supports and helps would you hope to see?
Good question.
Yeah, I think I was really lucky as was one of the first cohorts through the surgeon scientist where you could audit courses at Rotman. So I was able to do business classes not for credit, but as part of, I think it was the first year they offered an innovation. It was an innovation pathway. So I ended up that I took that pathway, but I think forums like this where you're able to network, connect with other people, take courses in entrepreneurship, like a true commercialization, not like I have an idea and what do I do, but it's more, what is the process? What's reimbursement? What's regulatory? Give the details around how do you really bring something to market would be pretty helpful. But I think it's also breaking down also some of the cultural, if you're working with industry or you've sold yourself, so breaking down some of the barriers with colleagues as well, to say, I'm here to make a change and make a difference, and versus the traditional way of thinking about how we would work with industry.
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, thanks for the great question. I would echo everything Karen said. I think what would I like to see in a program for students or trainees, whether it's medical students or residents or junior faculty or fellows, I think culture is really important, and I think there's been a huge shift as outlined by Dr. Rothstein and Dr. Semple. And when we launched our company, or when I was doing my MBA, I almost felt embarrassed at times to bring up innovation, especially like around my peers. And now it's commonplace and very easy to discuss with anybody. So there's been a huge cultural shift, and that right there, I think is a huge leap, and it's only going to get better. 2, I think you need protected time. So if there's an opportunity to do it within surgeon scientists, or maybe there's a spin-off of that and do surgeon entrepreneurship type of program. One of our residents just got admitted to the Stanford Biodesign program, or a biodesign fellowship, where they're going to do 1 year at Stanford in biodesign and engineering. And then, one of the outputs of that program is to launch a product. So, but he's also got a background in engineering, and he happens to be an orthopedic resident. It worked out really well. But there's a lot of opportunities that are similar or adjacent to that. And I think mentorship would be great. Like, whether it's someone like Amal at Mars, I'm sure he has a lot of free time. Dr. Semple or Karen. I think having mentors that have been through it, succeeded, failed, both can be very valuable. And John and I were talking about this. If we can convince Dr. Rutka to have a fund for a Dragon's Den competition once a year for trainees, that could provide some seed funding. So I'm not sure what Dr. Rutka will say, but thought we'd throw it out there.
Let's do it. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Excellent. We're past our time by a couple of minutes. We could, obviously, this is great conversation. We could keep going, but we have a time limit on this. I want to thank the panelists and the audience for joining in on this. It's a great conversation and fantastic to look forward to the next couple of workshops as well. And Ori, I'll hand it back to you for a wrap up, if you like.
Okay, thanks very much, John. And thanks, Karen and Jazz and Amal, and of course you, John, for putting this together. Joanna, it was amazing. It was a fabulous workshop, so much appreciated. I noticed that Paul Walker is one of the participants, or not part, an attendee. It was really Paul's inspiration that led us to setting up this series of workshops. So thanks to you, Paul, for doing that. So in the chat, there is the contact information for Amal. And so he would love to hear from you. You can see he can answer almost any question. And also Jazz put his slides in there as well. There was one slide that Jazz showed that I thought was a fabulous slide. That was one, the starting from scratch, which to me really brought together a lot of the key characteristics you have to have. Number one is once you identify an important problem that you want to solve, you have to be into it heart and soul. Passion is all important. You have to build a team that's really important, that's mission driven, that it really invests in things. You have to have a supportive ecosystem, which is one I think we're developing in the Department of Surgery here, not only in the trainees and the residents, but also through the surgeon scientist program and in the new faculty. And I think there was a lot of discussion around teams. And I think I just want to close around the discussion related to teams, because what I learned is having the right team is all important. One of the points that came up was the point that, at some point in time, if you're a surgeon, there's a little bit of tension between having a company and spending the time you need and actually being a full-time surgeon and doing what you need to do for your patients. And I think that you have to think early on through the development of your company, that balance between those two, and when you can start hiring people in to help you run the company. I think that was really come out loud and clear, and I think people have been through it. I think we saw 3 people here who talked about those challenges. The second thing that I found really interesting was the discussion around EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And thank you for bringing that forward, Karen, because I think that's critically important. I know, Amal made the comment that not every VC is interested in it as being an important characteristic of your company, but I would say that increasingly they are. And I think the one thing I learned from Karen was that, whether it's your technology functioning or testing it on individuals, you need to consider really an equity lens to see, to make sure that your technology is addressing the population in an equitable fashion. So that was the first one. The second one, I think, related to the companies and equity was the hiring practices. And I think Karen talked about that. And certainly there are people out there who can help you hire into your company and make sure that you're using the appropriate diversity lens. And finally, one of the things that I think is very practical is among with equity is really pay grades of the people who work in your company to make sure that everybody feels equal and people can feel invested in the company as being one that they want to belong to. So I think that those 2 points, running through the Jazz's slide and also Karen's really important points around EDI are ones that I took away from this. There are a lot of other ones, and I hope you'll send some emails in after this is over to give to our panelists, and we'll ask them to answer questions for us. So Joanna, thanks very much for organizing this. And Jim, some closing remarks for us tonight?
Yeah, thanks, Ori. And this is the second one I've attended. The first one hosted by Paul Walker was excellent, as you mentioned. And this one, similarly, a lot of great pearls were cast to all of us this evening. And thanks to all of you, thanks to the speakers, and Ori, thanks to you and Joanna for organizing. So thanks to all for joining. And I'll be speaking with Jazz about the opportunity to have a fund created every year for an inventor's den that we might be able to support from the Department of Surgery. So thanks, folks. Have a great evening all.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye.